Have you ever wondered why some people pray but still feel as though their hearts remain distant from God? Have you ever felt that something inside you, something you couldn't name, kept you from receiving the peace God wanted to give? And have you ever asked yourself what heaven sees when a soul approaches God with lips that pray but a heart that resists His mercy? In the quiet glow of her convent cell, where the flame of a single candle stretched against the pale wall, Saint Faustina discovered a truth so piercing that it stayed with her for the rest of her life. Not all barriers between the soul and God come from suffering or weakness. Many come from the hidden sins we refuse to confront. And among these, Jesus showed her three that close the soul most tightly to the flow of divine mercy. Before we begin this journey, stay with us and subscribe if you desire to walk more deeply into the mysteries Jesus revealed to Saint Faustina. It was during a moment of deep interior prayer that Jesus allowed her to sense what happens inside a soul that resists His mercy. Faustina described sitting silently before the tabernacle after night prayers. The convent halls had already grown quiet, and the sisters had returned to their cells. Only the soft hum of the evening wind pressed faintly against the chapel windows. There, in that serene stillness, Jesus made her aware of a painful reality, that some souls close themselves off, not because God refuses them, but because they refuse to allow His light to enter certain corners of their hearts. Faustina felt, interiorly, the spiritual weight of such a soul. It was not a vision of thunder or darkness, just a deep, aching absence, a kind of self-created distance from God. She understood that divine mercy is always flowing, always reaching, always seeking, but certain sins act like walls that block the river before it can touch the soul. The first thing she felt was pride, the subtle kind, hidden beneath good deeds and polite words. Pride makes the soul confident in itself and resistant to correction. Pride prefers admiration over transformation, and as Faustina sensed this, her heart trembled, because she saw how pride blinds the soul to its need for mercy. The second was despair, a heaviness that tells the soul that forgiveness is impossible. Jesus showed her that despair wounds Him deeply because it denies His goodness. It convinces the soul to remain far from the one who longs to heal it. And the third was indifference, the coldest of all. A soul that feels nothing, desires nothing, seeks nothing. A soul that becomes lukewarm, neither rejecting God nor embracing Him. Jesus revealed to Faustina that indifference is like spiritual frostbite. The soul stops noticing that it is dying. As Faustina knelt before the tabernacle, tears gathered in her eyes, not out of fear, but out of compassion. She realized that these three sins do not provoke God's anger. They provoke His sorrow, because they prevent Him from giving what He most desires to give, mercy. As the following days passed, Faustina found herself reflecting again and again on the weight of those three sins: pride, despair, and indifference. They were not merely moral failings. Jesus had made her feel how each one alters the inner climate of the soul. She understood that sin is not a single act, but a condition of the heart, a posture that either opens us to grace or quietly closes the door. And these three particular movements of the heart, more than any others, sealed the soul from receiving what God longs to give. One afternoon, she was asked to help in the infirmary, preparing warm compresses for a sister who was ill. The room carried a subtle scent of herbs. The sheets were neatly folded, and the sound of the sister's breathing filled the space with a fragile rhythm. As Faustina attended to her, she felt an interior light, a kind of gentle illumination, revealing something deeper about pride. Pride is not loud. It doesn't always boast. Sometimes it whispers. It lives in the quiet refusal to admit weakness, the resistance to being taught, the unwillingness to say I was wrong. Jesus allowed Faustina to understand that pride closes the soul because it creates an illusion of self-sufficiency. A soul convinced it can save itself will not reach for mercy. Later that evening, while carrying a pail of water across the courtyard, she felt another interior movement from Jesus. This time, it was the sorrow of despair. Not the despair of dramatic tears or collapse, but the silent despair that hides behind polite smiles, the despair that whispers, "Forgiveness is for others, not for me." Jesus let Faustina sense the loneliness of such a soul, a loneliness so deep that it echoed inside her chest. Despair closes the soul because it denies God's goodness. It turns His mercy into a distant dream instead of a present promise. That night Faustina returned to the chapel. Only a single candle flickered before the tabernacle, casting a soft oval of light on the polished floor. She knelt, and for a moment the silence felt almost alive. It was then that she understood the third sin with piercing clarity: indifference. Not hatred, not rebellion. Just coldness. A numbness of spirit that neither loves nor rejects God, simply ignores Him. Jesus showed her that indifference suffocates the soul because it kills desire. Without desire, prayer becomes empty, charity becomes mechanical, and the heart slowly turns to stone. Faustina trembled at this realization. Pride blinds, despair chains, indifference freezes, and each one in its own way shuts the door of the soul against the gentle knock of mercy. But even in the pain of this revelation, she sensed something beautiful. Mercy never stops knocking. Jesus waits at the threshold, not with anger but with longing. She lowered her head, tears slipping quietly onto her folded hands. She knew she was not studying these sins from a distance. She had felt pride. She had known moments of despair. She had tasted the bitterness of indifference. And yet Jesus had come for her anyway. That realization filled her chest with warmth, proof that the one who reveals the truth also provides the remedy. Faustina continued carrying these revelations in her heart like a quiet flame, always burning, always illuminating, yet never overwhelming. She knew that Jesus had shown her these truths, not to frighten her, but to help her understand the delicate interior movements of the human soul. And with every task she performed, every chore, every prayer, every act of service, He taught her how these three sins grow, often unnoticed, beneath the surface of a person's daily life. One morning before sunrise, she entered the chapel to pray. The air was cool and the faint light of dawn had not yet touched the stained glass windows. The tabernacle glowed softly in the dimness, like a hidden ember in the heart of the quiet room. As Faustina knelt, she felt Jesus drawing near, revealing how pride often disguises itself as virtue. She saw how a person might perform works of charity, not out of love, but out of a desire to feel superior. Pride can wear the mask of holiness. It can pray with perfect posture, while refusing to let God touch the areas where it is weak. A proud soul is like a closed fist. It cannot receive what God wants to place inside it. As she continued to pray, her heart was pulled into another truth. Despair rarely looks like dramatic sorrow. Sometimes it looks like silence. A person can smile, laugh, participate in life, and still be quietly convinced that their sins are too great, their past too heavy, their weakness too unforgivable. Jesus allowed Faustina to feel the internal struggle of such a soul, a trembling fear of approaching God, not because the person doesn't believe in mercy, but because they believe mercy is meant for someone holier, someone stronger, someone better. This lie wounds Jesus deeply because it cuts the heart off from the very love that was poured out to heal it. Then, as the chapel slowly brightened with the first blush of morning light, Faustina sensed the cold presence of indifference, the most subtle and dangerous of the three. Indifference doesn't attack, it erodes, it doesn't shout, it dulls. A soul touched by indifference stops longing for God, stops caring about prayer, stops noticing grace. It becomes spiritually numb. Faustina realized that indifference is the sin that suffocates the soul from within, making it unable to feel God, even when He stands right beside it. Jesus whispered to her spirit that indifference is like frost. It kills slowly, quietly, invisibly, until the soul no longer feels anything at all. Faustina felt the weight of these truths pressing on her heart, not as fear, but as sorrow. She understood that the divine consequences Jesus revealed were not sentences of punishment, but reflections of interior reality. Pride blinds the soul. Despair chains it. Indifference freezes it. And all three make the soul unable to respond to the gentle call of mercy. As she rose from prayer, she felt a renewed determination. She wanted her life to be a vessel of mercy, a living reminder that God does not grow weary with weak souls, only with closed ones. She prayed for every soul imprisoned by pride, despair, or indifference, believing deeply that even the smallest crack in those walls was enough for divine light to enter. As the days unfolded, the weight of what Jesus had shown her did not fade. If anything, the understanding grew sharper, like morning light slowly revealing the details of a landscape once hidden by darkness. Faustina began to see how these three sins, pride, despair, and indifference, shape a person's spiritual life, not just in dramatic moments, but in the smallest decisions, the quietest thoughts, the unseen attitudes that form the soul over time. One evening, while sweeping the long hallway outside the chapel, she paused near a small window. The sun had dipped low, setting the sky ablaze with streaks of rose and amber. Dust floated gently in the air, catching the last rays of light like tiny motes of gold. It was in this ordinary moment that Jesus whispered to her heart about pride again. Not the kind that boasts, but the subtle pride that makes a soul defensive, a soul that refuses correction, a soul that hides its wounds because it does not want to appear weak. This was the pride Jesus warned her about, the pride that bars the door of mercy because it refuses to admit need. Faustina continued sweeping, but her heart grew heavy as she realized how many souls fall into this quiet pride without even noticing it. She knew the temptation herself, the desire to appear holy, the fear of being misunderstood, the instinct to protect her image rather than expose her weakness to God. She whispered a small prayer in that dimly lit hallway, asking Jesus to strip her of every subtle form of pride, every small place in her heart where she tried to stand on her own strength. That night, she found herself thinking about despair. She remembered someone she had once met at the convent gate, a man whose eyes carried a sadness deeper than words could convey. He had come seeking a piece of bread, but Faustina sensed that what he truly needed was hope. She saw in him the essence of despair, not rage, not rebellion, but a quiet belief that nothing good could ever happen again. Jesus made her understand that despair is like a veil over the soul, distorting God's face into something distant or disinterested. When a soul despairs, it no longer runs toward mercy, it hides from it. Later, in the silence of her cell, she reflected on indifference, the sin that suffocates the soul most slowly. She understood now why Jesus called it so dangerous. Indifference steals life drop by drop. It doesn't cause sudden falls, but quiet fading. The soul becomes lukewarm, prayer becomes optional, love becomes routine. The heart stops thirsting for God, and in that numbness, mercy cannot flow. Faustina felt a sorrow so deep that she pressed her hand to her chest, sensing how painful it must be for Jesus to stand beside a soul that no longer cares whether he is near or far. She sat by her window that night, watching the moon rise behind the convent walls, lighting the courtyard with a quiet silver glow. And in that peaceful stillness she realized that all three sins shared one root, a heart that had stopped trusting love. Pride trusts itself. Despair trusts nothing. Indifference trusts nothing enough to care. With tears in her eyes, she whispered, "Jesus, make my heart small, honest and awake, always open to your mercy." The next morning, Faustina was assigned to the kitchen, tending to pots that had darkened from constant use. As she scrubbed the metal surfaces with steady, rhythmic motions, she felt the quiet presence of Jesus, drawing her into deeper understanding. The kitchen windows were fogged from the rising steam, and sunlight filtered through them in soft, broken beams. It was in this simple scene, surrounded by ordinary tasks, that he revealed something essential. These three sins do not only wound the soul, they reshape its inner landscape. She paused for a moment, hands still submerged in warm water, as an interior light unfolded within her. Pride, Jesus allowed her to feel, is like a tower built too high. A soul constructs it stone by stone, believing it offers protection. But instead of protecting, it isolates. From the top of that tower, the soul sees others from above, not beside. And more tragically, it convinces itself it can see God clearly, when in truth the walls it built now stand between them. Pride blinds. Pride stiffens. Pride convinces the soul it needs no help. And because mercy is a gift, not a conquest, a soul that cannot ask, cannot receive. Later that afternoon, while carrying firewood to the stove, Faustina felt the weight of despair again, not her own, but the spiritual heaviness Jesus allowed her to sense. Despair is a chain, she realized, forged from the belief that one's sins are stronger than God's love. She imagined a person kneeling in prayer, longing to be forgiven but unable to lift their eyes because shame pressed them down. This lie, that one is beyond mercy, darkens the soul like a thick shadow. It silences prayer. It paralyzes the heart. And Jesus suffers deeply when a soul believes he cannot heal them, for it turns the ocean of his mercy into a shallow puddle in their imagination. Despair insults the love that died on the cross. As the sky darkened and the convent prepared for evening prayer, Faustina found herself drawn to the chapel. The candles flickered in quiet harmony, casting reflections on the polished floor. Here, Jesus spoke to her interiorly about indifference, the sin that kills desire. She sensed how indifference numbs the spiritual senses. A soul touched by it becomes unmoved by grace, unmoved by beauty, unmoved by the gentle invitations of God. It stops feeling the tug of conscience. It drifts. It becomes spiritually drowsy. Jesus showed her that indifference locks the heart in a sleep that only suffering or a sudden awakening of grace can break. Faustina knelt longer than usual that night, her eyes fixed on the tabernacle. And slowly, she understood something transformative. These three sins do not make God reject the soul. They make the soul reject God, quietly, almost unknowingly, by closing the doors through which mercy longs to enter. She felt compassion rise within her, stronger than fear. She prayed for every soul caught in these invisible traps, praying that even the smallest spark of desire might reopen the path to grace. As she left the chapel, the cold air brushed her face, and she whispered, "Jesus, keep my heart always vulnerable to your mercy, break every wall, heal every fear, thaw every coldness." And she felt a quiet warmth inside, his gentle reassurance, reminding her that no soul is closed forever when even one breath longs for him. As the final days of that particular season passed, Faustina realized that Jesus had not only revealed the three sins that close a soul to mercy, he had also shown her the remedy. And it wasn't complicated, it wasn't hidden, it wasn't reserved for the perfect or the strong. It was simple, delicate, and profoundly human. Truth. The truth about oneself. The truth about God. The truth about the fragile, trembling spaces of the heart where mercy desires to enter. She reflected on this as she walked alone through the convent courtyard at dusk. The sky stretched in gentle shades of lavender and pale gold. A thin breeze moved through the trees, whispering softly through the branches. The stones beneath her feet were cool, worn smooth by the footsteps of generations of sisters before her. It was here, in the quiet beauty of that evening, that Jesus helped her see the final piece of his teaching. The soul closes itself to mercy through pride, despair, and indifference, but it opens again through humility, trust, and longing. Faustina paused by the small statue of the Virgin Mary that stood near the garden. A single lantern glowed beside it, throwing warm light across her serene face. She felt within her soul the quiet truth that humility is the antidote to pride. Not humiliation, but humility. The gentle courage to say, "Lord, I am small, and I need you." Humility makes space. Humility softens the heart. It tears down the illusion of self-sufficiency and invites God to be God. Then she sensed how trust dissolves despair. Not perfect trust, not the kind that never trembles or doubts, but simple trust. The trust of one who dares to say, "Maybe I cannot heal myself, but Jesus can." Trust reopens the windows of the soul, letting light stream into places that had grown dim. Trust lifts the eyes. Trust breathes again. And then she understood the remedy to indifference. Longing, even the smallest longing, even a sigh, even a faint movement in the heart that whispers, "God, I want to want you." Indifference freezes the soul, but longing thaws it from within. Jesus does not ask for perfect love, only for desire. A spark, a flicker, something tiny enough for his breath to kindle into flame. As Faustina stood there, hands gently folded before her, she felt Jesus' presence wrap around her like warm air after winter. Not as a vision, not as a dramatic experience, but as a certainty, quiet, deep, unmistakable. He helped her see that mercy is not fragile, it is not limited, it is not something a soul can outrun. Mercy is like a rising tide, always approaching, always reaching, always seeking the smallest crack through which it might flow. She walked slowly back toward the convent doors, the lantern lights gently illuminating her path. Her heart felt both heavy and weightless, heavy with compassion for souls trapped in pride, despair, and indifference, and weightless with joy because she knew the truth. No soul is too far, too frozen, too fallen, or too proud for mercy to find. What closes the soul can be opened again. What hardens the heart can become tender. What grows cold can be warmed by even a single breath of grace. As she entered the chapel for the final prayers of the day, Faustina whispered into the silence, "Jesus, I trust in you." And she knew that every soul who spoke those words, even trembling, even weak, even uncertain, would never be closed to God again.